Welcome to episode 2 of Chess. In this episode, we hit the 1500s with the fourth recorded game of chess in 1512 between Pedro Damiano and No Name. So, Pedro starts with the king's pawn opening. Solid opening, controls the middle, that's going to be my go-to. And No Name responds with the king's pawn as well, so they meet in the middle. Next up, Pedro brings out his knight, very by-the-book move, attacks this pawn, which No Name will have to protect. But instead of bringing out the knight, which is the go-to move, he decides to push up his f-pawn, which allows for a crazy knight sacrifice. Brilliant move, going down in 1512. Personally, I'm not seeing this move, but Pedro might be the GOAT of chess in the 1500s, probably the best player on planet Earth. So No Name just takes back with the pawn, which at first glance you might think is the best move, but it allows Pedro to hit him with a nasty fork. There we go, queen to h5. Boom, we hit the king, we hit the pawn. Perfect opening so far from Pedro. So he has to get his king up out of the way, or could potentially block with the pawn, but does not want to do that, so moves up the king one. Pedro's able to take the pawn. Now the king is in check again. I mean, just look at this position. You got your king on the 7th rank, a queen beaming at it. I mean, this is just terrible stuff for No Name. He's down 3.7 on the meter. He is not having a good time. So king is basically forced to move, no other moves possible. And then Pedro, on his absolute A game, brings out his bishop, bam, beaming the king. Queen blocking this square. This king is in so much trouble right now. No Name needs to find the perfect response, and he will, pushing up his pawn to d5. So it blocks a check from the bishop, also is going to allow him to bring his white square bishop out at some point in the future. Now Pedro finds another best move, just takes the pawn, trying to attack this king again, going for an early checkmate, so the king just has to walk out of the way. Now his king is on the 6th rank, and we're on move 7. This dude No Name is not having a good time right now, brother. I would resign at this point. Now Pedro so far perfect. Bit of a mistake and inaccuracy. It's close to even, but it just hurts him on the meter. Just supposed to check the king again. Now does No Name find the move to turn this around? Nope. Just pushes up his pawn over to h6. Supposed to go to h5. I'm not exactly sure. I'm only 960 elo, but I assume you get this pawn pushed up, get the king back there. Can block with this pawn as well. Probably a better structure, and this leads to losing a pawn. Now Pedro doesn't see the way to win the pawn. I don't think too many people would. Apparently he's supposed to send in the bishop, and there's like a crazy computer line where he's up. I don't see. I just assumed that my opponent would take back. So a rare miss from Pedro. You know, he's just thinking, okay, I'll send in the pawn, I'll check the king. We got our pieces beamed. This guy is in a lot of trouble. If he finds a great move, I think it's pretty obvious at this point. I mean, you have two options. You move the king here, or you move your king to the 5th rank. I mean, who in their right mind above like 400 elo is doing that? Either way, he does get a great move. Good for him. Now Pedro finds a move which I think is truly great. Bishop to f7. Now this move threatens a checkmate if he gets his bishop over here. This king, I mean, what's he going to do? He can't take. And he is just surrounded by pieces. But now No Name gets another great move. Gets the knight up out of the way. Now Pedro looking to find a way to win. Moves the queen over to g3. Which isn't an accuracy, so the best move is to move the pawn up too. But this guy, he's going for a crazy checkmate. I don't know if you see the idea, but No Name, I think, only has really one good move to stop it. Now, does No Name see that move? Nope. He just brings out his knight. I'm not sure what he's thinking there, whatever, go for standard development, but he has got to get his queen there. Because what he misses, this guy Pedro's actually cracked at the game. He does a queen sacrifice. Queen to g6. My goodness, No Name has no defense. The bishop beamed there, king has no escape route, queen attacking the king. He can't take because it's defended by the pawn, so the knight comes in, it's basically forced, has to take. And then my guy Pedro takes the knight, pawn checkmate up in 1512. My goodness, 2-0 for Pedro, at least on the record books. Next we jump 3 years ahead, we have Luis Ramirez versus Quintana. So Luis starts out with c3, which is a book move, but not the best, as you do want to take the center. Quintana goes knight to c6, and then the d pawn comes out. Everything fine so far until Quintana goes to e6. Just a questionable move. I'm not sure what they're thinking with that. You definitely want to match in the center. This gives Luis quite a strong opening. Pawn over to e4, and my goodness, you just got the whole center on lockdown right now. Now this time around, Quintana does go pawn to d5, but it's an inaccuracy as Luis Ramirez could push the pawn over to the 5th rank. Super powerful in this position, but instead he just takes the pawn. So pawns are traded, and we got a pretty even position. Now Luis does an interesting move, pawn to g3. Just questionable, you know, you want your standard development, you want to get your pieces out, but hey, it's 1512. They don't have computers, they don't have engines. And at 960 elo, if I took a time machine, would I beat either of these guys? Probably not. But still, I don't know what he's doing with that move, but it's fine. Now Quintana brings out the bishop. Excellent move, fine development. Now Luis goes for a bishop trade. The engine wants him to threaten this pawn over on d5, so bishops come off the board. Knight over to g3 takes back, and black is up slightly on the meter, but still a lot of game left. Next, Quintana develops the queen over to d7, knight to f4 for Luis, threatening that pawn. So Quintana brings out his knight over to f6 to defend the pawn. Now queen to f3, fine move, get your pieces developed. Now Quintana goes for a trade, takes the knight over on f4. And Luis is able to take back and develop the bishop at the same time, so good stuff for him. Next, Quintana castles to the queen's side. I like what he got going on here, connects the rooks and has two powerful pieces down the d file. Luis decides to castle as well, the best move, get that king protected. Now Quintana, he thinks he's slick here, sends in the queen over to h3, looking to set up a quick checkmate. Now to counter, Luis brings his bishop over to g5, attacking that knight, which is pinned to the rook, but Quintana sends in the knight thinking, okay, if I can get my queen there, I'm about to cook this dude Luis, but Luis, he's too pro for that. He finds a great move on the board, brings his queen over to g2, which is literally the only move that works. Other than that, he will be checkmated. So Quintana goes for a queen trade and then threatens the bishop over on g5. Luis has to retreat it, brings it over to d2, which apparently is supposed to go back to home base. Personally, I bring it to d2. I don't want to block the rooks, but excellent move either way. Now Quintana has an inaccuracy, does rook over to e8, which personally, I'd do either that move or bring this rook out. When I see an open file, I want to take it. But it allows the opponent to kick a knight, which the engine does not like. Now, does Luis kick this knight over on g4? Nope, he brings in his rook. Decides, you know, I don't want this guy in an open file. Let's do a rook trade. But now Quintana looks to take back the file. Luis, with an excellent move to counter, brings the knight over to d2, so is able to develop it and protect his bishop with the rook over on a1. Quintana rerouting his knight. Now Luis brings his knight back, looking to develop the bishop. The black knight goes over to f5, and the bishop takes d2. Right now, the meter has them almost exactly even, but this game is about to get good. So more knight movement from Quintana over to d6. Now Luis pushes the h-pawn, got an amazing structure here. A fair move. A good move from Quintana, threatening the bishop on d2, so Luis got to get him up out of the way. Now Quintana, looking to make things interesting, brings his pawn over to g5, which is a mistake. Now Luis just takes back. He's instead supposed to kick the knight, but does not see that move, so Quintana takes back. And now Luis finds the best move, threatens the knight, so got to get up out of there, and black finds a great move, moving the knight over to d6. This allows white to go up in material, taking the pawn over on g5, but Quintana finds a great move, bringing his rook over to e2, checking the king, and attacking the pawn over on b2. So best move for white is to get the king over to h3, and Quintana picks up a pawn. So Luis develops the knight, threatening the pawn over on d5. Then Quintana, with an inaccuracy, brings his knight over to b5, is supposed to pawn push down the a file. Luis is able to pick up a pawn, then Quintana, fine development, goes for a good move, trying to double attack this pawn. But Luis ignores the attack, takes the open e file. Now Quintana, it makes sense. He's like, all right, I'll just take this pawn over on c3. That looks wide open, but it is a complete mistake. Borderline a blunder, because it allows Luis to send in the rook to the 8th rank, checking the king. The best move for black is to king walk, avoiding the check, but Luis, with the knight, checks the king and protects his rook at the same time. King forced to move over to d6, and then Luis with this nasty move, bishop to f4, checkmate. This king is completely cooked, attacked by the bishop. Rook takes away the e file, both white squares on the d file attacked by the knight, and then this pawn takes c5, and that is GG's. If you enjoyed, like and sub, and stay joyful.